Uh, Natasha, would you be able to go to my Facebook page and share the stream into the New London Synagogue page? Is that possible?
I shall do my best.
I will off. I will. Welcome. Thank you. Those of you who were here last week, pleasure to have you coming back. And I will endeavour to whatever it was you liked about the last thing. I'll try and do more of the same. And for those of you who are just joining us, you missed the first 3,000 years, and there's only 2,000 years to go. And I'm looking to bite off 1,000 of those this week. This is the ancient period. We are going from around about minus 200 to round about the year 900 of the Common Era. What I did last week was sort of split my time between just an overarching chronology, mapping the kind of internally Jewishly significant moments of history against some of the things that are going on in the surrounding culture. And then I kind of dropped into fairly deeply. I dropped into more deeply some kind of key moments, which I think kind of illustrates some of the whirlwind of tensions that exist as Judaism unfolds through time. And I'll be doing that again. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm also going to where are we? We are here, but I want not that one. You're looking at yourselves. That's rather strange, but this one, and I am going to do this and this, and off we go. I'm going to need some volunteer script readers in a few moments. So brace yourselves. If you are not on mute and you intend to be on mute, if you could pop yourselves on mute, that would be helpful. I'm picking up my story in secular year minus 334 or 334 BCE before the Common Era, or 334 BC before Christ, as the Christians would say, and that's corresponding to the Hebrew date of 3428. And I was talking about this last time. We are Jewishly speaking in the year 5782, which means that there's a kind of a disparity of 3,760 years between the Hebrew calendar and the secular calendar. So that's what's going on in those left two columns. And what has just happened, or what in 334 BCE, is that Alexander the Great, in this enormous, swathing, conquering, magnificent achievement, has swallowed up Israel along with everything else. So much else that when he dies, the two empires that come out from the Macedonian Empire of Alexander the Great, that is the empire of the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, they take two empires to sort of inherit this amazing triumph of Alexander the Great. And a couple of hundred years later, the Seleucids come along and they conquer Jerusalem. So they've conquered it from the Ptolemies, and we've got this guy called Antiochus III. No major problems with Antiochus III being in charge, but when Antiochus IV comes to be the head of the Seleucids, he kind of embarks on this process of Hellenization, of Greekifying everywhere that he was in charge of. And that's going to lead to the Maccabean revolt. So the story of the Maccabees that we tell of ourselves at Hanukkah, it's a historical event that definitely happened, and we're going to be able to see, both coin evidence of that and also literary evidence of that. Hold on to your seats. The interesting thing about the Maccabean revolt, in terms of the religious imagination and the historical reality, is that the religious imagination ends with the story happily ever after, right? The children of the Maccabees re-enter the temple, they rededicate the temple, hoorah, end of story. But when you read the historical accounts, the quasi-historical accounts, having kind of re-entered into the temple, it goes horribly wrong. You get all kinds of people being killed in Jew violence, including high priests. You get a whole bunch of kings and priests of very, very dubious religious virtue, and the whole Maccabean dream, the Hasmonean dream, turns to be a bit of a disaster if you are a Jew. And eventually the whole Seleucids, Ptolemyd thing all passes, and along comes Rome. And Pompey is the person who conquers Rome, minus 63, so 63 BCE. Obviously this incredibly interesting person in terms of a whole swathe of architecture built in Jerusalem at the time by King Herod. He's ruling from minus 44 to minus 4 of the Common Era. That is, the period of Julius Caesar's assassination. And there are at this time kind of Jewish-Roman tensions. Judaism is in quite a sectarian place. I'm not going to say much about that today, but you've got people off living in the desert, these Essenes, who, they don't like what's going on in Jerusalem, but they want to retain a lot of the kind of apparatus of how Judaism was being done in the time of the temple, around ritual purity and things like that. And then you've got the rise of the rabbis. And we're starting to see the rabbis rise as we come into the Common Era, as we come into CE or AD in the Christian terminology. But it's a tough time to be moving up, or perhaps a better way of saying it, as the priest leadership of Judaism is completely coming to a crashing halt. There is a vacuum of leadership. And you can see the priest leadership of Judaism coming to a sort of a shuddering halt around the time of 66 to 70, where the Jews are revolting against the Romans, and that does not work. And there is a fall of Jerusalem, there is a fall of Masada, and emerging out of the rubble of the end of the priestly leadership of Judaism, and I'm sorry to any Kohanim who are here, as rabbinic Judaism emerges because of the leadership of someone called Yochanan ben Zakkai, who we will meet, and we'll be doing a good look at this kind of moment, both told from within Judaism and slightly on the edge of Judaism. I'll say more about that in a second. You get a complete transformation of Judaism, probably a more radical transformation of Judaism than we've seen in the last 100 years, with the Holocaust, with the rise of Zionism, with the creation of the State of Israel, and issues around egalitarianism. I mean, even as radical as the last 100 years of Judaism has been, I don't think it matches the radical transformation of the first 100 years, or I guess from the year 50 to the year 150 of the Common Era. Moving slightly later on, you've got Hadrian. He's terribly excited about a temple in Jerusalem. He thinks it would be a perfect place to be to worship Jupiter. That doesn't go very well for the Jews. They don't like that. More persecutions, more revolts, persecutions, revolts, and Jerusalem kind of loses its status as the center of the Jewish people, because you can't be there and be proudly Jewish because the Romans are going to smash you, and you can't be there and be Roman while still being Jewish. So you can feel a center of Jewish life leaving Jerusalem. And by the way, what's happening at that time is that the Roman Empire itself is starting to weaken. What is beginning to emerge is a Parthian empire, Sasanian empire. And that power base is in Babylon. So Jews who are leaving Jerusalem move towards Babylon, and you start to see Baghdad becoming an important sort of center. Things settle in the relationship between the Jews and Rome. There is this hugely important moment in 306 in the Common Era. And again, we're going to have a look at that later today. In 306 of the Common Era, Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, converts to Christianity. And that all of a sudden completely changes what Christianity is and was, and therefore what the Jewish relationship with Christianity is and was. Just moving back in time a little bit, when I'm talking in 26 to 36 about Roman tensions and sectarianism, the Romans in this time pre Constantine's conversion to Christianity, when the Roman Empire is just the Roman Empire and not the holy brackets Catholic or Christian or Roman Empire. The Romans saw, Jesus or Christians or, all forms of sectarian Judaism, which of course Christianity was in its earliest years, kind of the same. Even if we as Jews would see ourselves as being radically different from Christianity. But once Constantine converts to Christianity, the Roman Empire becomes Catholic, the Roman Empire becomes holy, and therefore kind of, Christianity moves from being other to Rome in the same pot as Judaism to being, the same as Rome and in a very different pot to Judaism. And again, we're going to look at that. That's going to be another kind of like focus for us as we go through. And then, sorry, I slightly misspoke talking about the fall of Rome in earlier periods. That's not happening. Baghdad is getting more important, but Rome remains very, very important at this time, obviously. 570 to 632 is the life of Muhammad. If this were a course in Islamic history, we would be astounded at the pace at which a enormous swathe of land becomes the Ummah. Interestingly, of course, Ummah comes from the Arabic for the Hebrew word part of the sort of the peoplehood of Islam, and that stretches right the way around the Mediterranean, into areas like Baghdad, and as the Roman grip on the Middle East loosens, you get this centralization of Islamic power in Baghdad. And the last thing that we're going to look at today is the period of Sajigot-On. I'll say a bit more about that as we get to that later. Sajigot-On alive, 892 to 942. So that's my kind of overarching chronology from Alexander the Great, the Seleucids, the Ptolemies, through the Maccabean period, through the Hasmonean period, into the rise of Rome, what that does to Judaism around the destruction of the temple, Judaism's relationship with Christianity over that moment when Constantine himself converts to Christianity, and then we'll look at Jewish life in Islamic Baghdad and what's going on for Judaism there. How are we all doing? So far, so good. Fantastic. I talked about Antiochus Epiphanes. I talked about this Seleucid emperor who was more of a troublemaker than previous Antiochuses. But, fascinatingly, we've got a sense of what he looked like. Here are a couple of coins of Antiochus Epiphanes, the baddie of the Maccabean story. The interesting thing about the one on the top is that this is the kind of coin that you mint if you've just been through a very successful military campaign. Look at me. I went off with my boat. We kicked some, enemy backside, and I'm now coming back laden with the spoils of war. So, he's a real person. We know about him. We have all kinds of historical epigraphy that allows us to understand who he was. And among those documents are a series of actually 5 books, which are the books of the Maccabees. So what are the books of the Maccabees? Again, just checking in our time period, -164. The books of the Maccabees are not part of the Hebrew Bible. They are not canonized by Jews. They are what Christians sometimes call intertestamental. Christians talk about an Old Testament, a New Testament, and some stuff in the middle. And they were not preserved by Jews, but they are preserved by some Christian churches in their native language, in their kind of language of religion, Greek particularly, Syriac also. But what we have now done is we've got those. We can translate them back into Hebrew. Who knows if it's accurate Hebrew or not? And also translate them into English. So I'm going to just start to have a look at some of the books of Maccabees. Here we go. This is the very beginning of Maccabees 1, or 10 verses in. So talking about his father Antiochus III, from them came forth a sinful root, never a good way to be introduced. Antiochus Epiphanes, king of the previous Antiochus. He'd been a hostage in Rome and he began to roam. In those days, certain renegades came out from Israel, that's Jews, and misled many, saying, "Let us go and make a covenant with the Gentiles around us. For since we have separated from them, many disasters have come upon us, and this pleased them." And it's just an interesting way to understand the beginning of the story. It's not a story that is led by the badness of Antiochus Epiphanes. It's led by the badness of these, what would we call them, assimilating Jews, these Jews who look at the more successful, the more financially wealthy, the more militarily powerful Seleucids and say, oh, we'll have some of that. They're forgetting the importance of Frushim Tihiyu, the classic commentary on the verse when God says to the children of Israel, be holy, it's understood as be different. They're forgetting that. They go eagerly to the king who authorized them to observe the ordinances of the Gentiles. Interesting. I wonder if perhaps the thing that leads them to go to the king is that they need someone to say, if you are going to do these things that are so not Jewish, are so Hellenized, will you look after our back? Because the Jews won't. They might even lock us up. They might excommunicate us. We wouldn't have anywhere to get buried. We might not be able to get a job. Will you look after us? And yes, says the king, I will. What do? They built a gymnasium. Oh, I'm sorry about this, that we can't quite see this. How can I help with that? There we go. That'll do. They build a gymnasium according to Gentile custom, and they removed the marks of circumcision, Gewalt, and abandoned the holy covenant. They joined with the Gentiles and sold themselves to do evil. Interesting to catch that word, sold themselves. When you see a word like sold themselves, you're suggesting that part of what is leading them into this place is pecuniary advantage, right? It's not that they believe that the theology of Antiochus Epiphanes is a superior theology, but that they're doing it for the money. But they have removed the marks of circumcision and abandoned the holy covenant. This is quite dramatic stuff. We've even got some sort of illuminations of this kind of thing. So here comes Antiochus a little bit later. He's coming up against Israel. He comes to Jerusalem and he arrogantly enters the temple, takes all this gold stuff. We were doing this in last week's Parsha. All these specific items of the tools of the priestly temple ritual, and he's taken it all. He's taken the silver, the gold, also the hidden treasures, and he's gone off with them all. Mattathias, and we'll meet Mattathias. He is Mattathias, the original Maccabee, or Daddy Maccabee. He says, woe is me, why was I born to see the ruin of my people? Why are they still alive? They mourn, interestingly, right? They tear their garments, they put on sackcloth. The officers of the king in charge enforcing the apostasy comes to Modi'in to make them sacrifice. And many of Israel joins them, but Mattathias and his sons draw together. And the officers go, it's just so interesting. You see, I think, in this sort of behavior, so many modalities of treatments of leaders in Judaism. You can almost hear some of these kind of awful things that were done in concentration camps by Nazis. Who do you get to bow down first? You single out your leaders. So they go to Mattathias and says, you're a leader. Be the first to obey the king's command, to bow down, right? There's obviously, subsequent echoes of Haman and the Esther story. Then you will be numbered among the king's friends and we will pay you off. Interestingly, right, here comes the bribe to adopt the Seleucid behaviors is a bribe of money again, right? What is religion? What is economics? Oh no, says Mattathias, right? Although all the Gentiles in the king's realm obey him, they forsake the religion of their ancestors and consent to the king's orders. Interesting, right? He's attacking, this is not talking about Christianity, he's attacking Jews who have gentilified themselves. Can you see that in that language? The kind of person who has forsaken the covenant, who has forsaken circumcision. They've joined a gymnasium, God forbid, right? I and my sons, my kindred, will keep to the covenant of our ancestors. We will not obey the words of the king by departing from our religion the slightest decree. He's an absolute purist. And here again, we're starting to see these incredibly interesting tensions that you see again and again and again in the Jewish story, and explain who we are, I think, at New London Synagogue, pulling between, do you assimilate? Do you just stand firm? Can you learn anything from a non-Jew, even if it's kind of like not striking the very quick of your theology, or do you have to exclude absolutely everything? Is it a matter of negotiation, or is it a matter of strictness and firmness? Mattathias is a firm guy. He is a zealot. What does he do? As Mattathias is explaining all this, this other guy comes forward to sacrifice on the altar of Modi'in to Antiochus Epiphanes, right, according to the king's order. So, who is this? Is this someone scared? Is this someone looking to ingratiate themselves with Antiochus Epiphanes? Is this someone who, before this point, had already started to get very excited about being allowed into the surrounding culture of this sort of Hellenist Seleucid empire? But he's gone over to, Mattathias would say, the dark side. What does he do? He's filled with zeal. His heart was moved, and his just fury was aroused. Interesting, right? It's okay for him to be so furious. He springs forward and kills him, and he kills the messenger of the king who is forcing them to sacrifice, and he tears down the altar as well. And this, I think, is fascinating. He showed his zeal for the Lord just as Pinchas did with Zimri, the son of Salu. And this is where I think you start to see the relationship between the literary and the religious and the historical, right? What am I talking about here? I'm talking about the 3 verses before the beginning of Parashat Pinchas, which we'll get to in a few weeks. It's in Leviticus, where Pinchas sees something he doesn't like. It happens to be a Jew sleeping with a non-Jew, and he rises up and he spears them both through their sort of nether regions or something. And this is kind of Kohenic. This is sort of priestly. This sort of toughness, that in itself is picking up on previous ideas about who Levi are as a tribe and what it means to be a strong supporter of God. These are people who are kind of violent, and Mattathias is placing himself in that Masorah. Now, what do I think really happened? I don't know, right? I don't have historical evidence of it, but it's clear that the Maccabeans, led by Mattathias and his sons, including Yehuda HaMaccabee, Judah the Maccabee, they did indeed depart from the society of well-meaning, well-behaving, as it were, Seleucids, and run off into the hills. They fought a guerrilla campaign. Did they do that because they were thinking about Pinchas? Possibly. They're certainly stark, right? They're certainly fierce, uncompromising kinds of people. And off he goes. Now, that's told in the books of book 1 of the books of Maccabees. We've got a similar story in book 2 of the book of Maccabees. And interestingly, nowhere in the book of Maccabees do we get any kind of story about an everlasting flask of oil. That only appears in the Talmud. It's a much later text. The Talmud is still in formation at this point, where it's not even in formation, doesn't really exist at this point. The story of the Talmud, I don't know, maybe 300, 400, certainly by something like 475 of the Common Era. But here we're minus, 164, 168. So it's much, much, much earlier. You're seeing what seems to be partly a theological dispute, partly Antiochus Epiphanes being excited about people bowing down to him, and a kind of zealotry amongst the Hasmoneans who don't want to see Jews get confused and fall in with the assimilate into that kind of Hasmonean world. There we go. but you know, just in terms of like, what do I do with the historical record, and in terms of what do I do with my epigraphy, the sort of the letters, the books, the writings that are left behind. This is some Maccabean coinage, not quite from the period of Yehuda Maccabee, but from John Hyrcanus, who's a couple of generations later. A couple of interesting things to know about John Hyrcanus, right? You will see in the word Hyrcanus a Greek word. Fascinating, you know? So that even as they portray themselves as being people who want nothing to do with a Hellenization agenda, it creeps in anyway, right? So it's John Hyrcanus, you know, much I suppose in the same way. I remember when I was in Israel, someone, you know, didn't want to call me Jeremy because they wanted to call me by my Hebrew name, Yirmiyahu. And it just kind of annoyed me, partly because my Hebrew name isn't Yirmiyahu, it's Yaakov. But like, you know, also partly because they still thought that Thursday was Thursday. You know, or you know, and even when they were talking in the Hebrew terms, they still called the month late July into August sorry, wrong month. The month of June into July, Tammuz, named after the Babylonian god Tammuz. It's like you can't disinfect yourself from a surrounding culture; it will seep in. You have to decide what to do about it. But this is, you know, I think interesting to see. First thing to know about is that we have not found valuable coins. We haven't found Hasmonean coins made out of gold or silver. Did they use them? Maybe, and maybe they then got melted down by somebody else. But the only stuff that survived has been small change, copper, right? Or, you know, bronze pruta. And this it's got a double cornucopia on one side. That's a sort of a bunch of stuff, and a Hebrew inscription on the other. And all of these Hasmonean coins all have the same inscription. So-and-so, so-and-so. Here, for example, John Hyrcanus, Kohen Gadol, high priest, and Chaver HaYehudim, the community of friend of the Jews or something. And interestingly, again, this variety has a Greek alpha above the Hebrew inscription, possibly referring to the detente, right? The arose between John Hyrcanus and the pretender to the Syrian throne in 128. This is 40 years after the Maccabean revolt. The Maccabeans are still running Jerusalem, but they're having to make deals. They're having to kind of find a way to survive. You know, if you picture the map where you've got the Mediterranean Sea and you have powerful forces coming from the north, powerful forces coming from the south, powerful forces coming up from through Egypt, the Jews are kind of caught in the middle of this, and they're having to negotiate their way, just as was the case in biblical periods. You know, when Isaiah gets absolutely involved in this kind of stuff, where Amos gets absolutely involved in this kind of stuff, you're always having to work out who you are and how you get on with the people around you, both as a matter of politics and a matter of theology, of a matter of science, a matter of sociology. This is the Jewish condition. There's nothing new in having to balance up our own kind of interests and sense of self with the society that surrounds us. How are we doing? All right. I wonder how best I can do that. If you have, I've just clicked the corner of my little box of pictures of you all, and hello, you're looking lovely. And I can see Anna David Summers and Brian Gordon and Gerald and David Isaacs and Sally Michelson. Would you all be up for doing a little bit of reading for me if we make our way? Great, lovely. So, you know, Anne and David, Brian, Gerald, David Isaacs and Sally, if you wouldn't mind sort of unmuting yourselves. And we have a story. Now, I've edited this, I mean, almost not at all. What we're going to look at is almost word for word the Talmud telling the story of the destruction of Jerusalem. So what I'm going to do is look at the story of the destruction of Jerusalem told from the inside, which year are we in, 70 of the Common Era, and then I'm going to try and look at that story slightly differently, more from the outside. I'll say exactly about how I'm going to look at at that in a second. But let's have a go at how do the Jews, sorry, I should be much more careful about that. How do the rabbis, as it were, the victors of the transformation of Judaism that takes place as the temple falls, how do the rabbis tell this story? I guess let's not worry too much about how we make our way through this. But if Anne, you go first, followed by David, followed by Brian, followed by Gerald, and David. I'll come on to you. Anne and then David. Go for it.
The Birioni were in the city.
Let us go out and make peace with the Romans.
Brian.
I've lost it.
Oh, sorry. Gerald, are you okay? Are you unmuted? David, are you unmuted? Gerald, we're that first line, the second line of rabbis.
I got it back now.
Oh, great. Oh, no. Maybe this could have worked slightly better if I'd have prepared it further in advance. Gerald, are you okay to unmute? David, are you okay to unmute? David Isaacs? Sorry. Sally, are you okay to unmute? You will not succeed.
If you can hear me.
Go for it, Sally.
From the rabbis, you will not succeed.
Correct. John, are you able to share this next bit of narration? John Gilbert.
Yes. The Birioni then rose up and burnt the stores of wheat and barley so that a famine ensued.
Okay, let me just pause there for a second, right? So the Birioni are in the city and they don't want to make peace with the Romans. We're back in this business of assimilation. Who do you partner with? Who do you fight against? Who do you, on which side are you? And when there are larger forces out there, do you punch them or do you try and make your way? Rabbis, try and make our way. Birioni, no. And in order to make sure that everybody in Jerusalem gets on the side of having to fight the Jews, they burn the stores. So anybody who thought, oh, you know what, let's wait out this siege. We've got like a lot of wheat, we've got a lot of barley. We can just kind of wait it out and wait until this sort of whole tense period calms down. The Birioni go, no, we're exacerbating this situation. I mean, it's tough negotiation tactics from the Birioni. A little bit of background, John, to conclude this piece of narration, as it were.
Abba Sikra, the head of the Birioni in Jerusalem, was Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai's nephew.
Okay, interesting. So we've got our two lead characters for the next piece: Abba Sikra, head of the Birioni, and Rabban Yochanan. Anne and David, we're back to you. Do you want to have a Sally? Would you be narrator, and perhaps David, you can be Rabban Yochanan, and Anne, you can be Abba Sikra.
Mm-hmm. Oh, nephew, come visit me privately.
He came.
How long are you going to carry on this way and kill all the people with starvation?
What can I do? If I say a word to them, they will kill me.
It's fascinating, right? He's the head of the Birioni, but he has unleashed a force that he is no longer in control of. I mean, again, it feels so contemporary. I mean, choose your political narrative. But people who played with fire and end up getting burnt by their own supporters who are now more feisty than they are. I mean, fascinating to watch this kind of stuff. Be reported inside the Talmuds. One more down. Come on. Sorry. Yuck. Here we go. Yes. Anne and David and Sally still again, please.
Rabban Yochanan says, devise some plan for me to escape. Perhaps I shall be able to save a little.
Pretend to be ill. Let everyone come to inquire about you. Bring something evil smelling and put it by you so that they will say you are dead.
Rabbi Yochanan did this, and Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua carried him out in a coffin. When they reached the door,
that's the door of the city of Jerusalem, of course.
Some Roman guards wanted to put a lance through the bier.
Right, check that the only people getting out of the city are dead. Interesting, we're learning something about siege warfare. It's okay to do a siege, but you don't force the dead to remain in the city. You know, once someone dies in a siege, you let the dead out so they can be buried outside the city. You know, it's just kind of interesting to pick up sort of social realia of siege, you know, tactics, as it were, on the time. John, would you go for, please, Rabbi Eliezer? And I'm lining you up, please, also for Vespasian in a few moments.
Shall the Romans say they have pierced their master?
The guards opened a town gate for him, and he got out.
Interesting, right? Jews are very concerned about, we call it kibud hamet, the honor and dignity due to those who have passed away. So they're not wanting, you know, they're saying, don't stab someone who's dead, you know, let him go. And it works, you know. Again, I mean, it feels very Game of Thronesian, right? I mean, it feels, you know, really sort of political and thrilling in this way.
When he reached the Romans, he said,
Peace to you, O king. Peace to you, O king.
Now, this is Vespasian. Vespasian at this point is not the emperor. Who's the emperor? Titus. But this is the year 70 in the Common Era. And if you know your Roman history, you'll know that this is called the year of the four kings, because a whole bunch of emperors died. And they were looking for the successor, and then the successor to the successor, and then the successor to the successor, and then the successor to the successor to the successor, at which point people are going to start looking at Vespasian. Sorry, spoiler alert. But, you know, Vespasian is hanging out in Israel, not thinking of himself as the emperor or, you know, the king at all, but yet he's just been called the king. Smart guy, Vespasian. What does he say, John?
Your life is forfeit on two counts. One, because I am not a king and you call me king. And again, if I am a king, why did you not come to me before now?
At this point, a messenger came to him from Rome, saying,
Anne, would you take over? Oh, rats. Anne, would you take over, please, reading as the messenger?
Rise, for the emperor is dead, and the notables of Rome have decided to make you, Vespasian, head of the state.
Boom! I mean, you know, nevuah, prophecy, you know, just this sort of like this slightly sort of magical quality. Do I believe that this is a historical account? Not for a second. But listen, you know, but this is the rabbis portraying the rabbis as the hero of the story. And by the way, rabbinic Judaism does survive. You know, it survives because the Romans let it survive. So, you know, spoiler alert, it's a fairly well-known story, but there has to be, I think, something which is about the rapprochement between Judaism and the Romans once the priestly, Biryoni, uppity, non-negotiating part of Judaism gets, you know, destroyed. You know, something is allowed to continue, but we've now solved the problem, right? Not only that he wasn't a king, because he is now king, and also why Yochanan ben Zakkai didn't go beforehand, because he wasn't a king until pop, you know, right at this moment, and he's arrived 3 minutes before the messenger. Phew. We're moving on. I think we're all still well cast at this point with our narrator, Vespasian and Rabbi Yochanan.
Vespasian had just finished putting on one boot. When he tried to put on the other, he could not. He tried to take off the first, but it would not come off.
What is the meaning of this?
Do not worry. The good news has done it. As it says, good tidings make the bone fat, Proverbs 15:30. What is the remedy? Let someone who you dislike come and pass before you, as it is written, a broken spirit dries the bones, Proverbs 17:22.
Narrator, I've stolen a line from you, right? You know, he did so and the boot went on. I mean, this is comedy gold. You know, a little bit reminiscent maybe of Joseph, who goes into Pharaoh and solves the dream, but here a bit more kind of smart, right? I mean, you know, one of the things I've always felt about Joseph's dream is how didn't everybody else know that it prophesied 7 years of, you know, good and 7 years of famine? But here he is, and notice again, what's coming out of this well? The Torah. Ta-da! You know, in other words, the destruction of the temple is not a sign of the weakness of Torah. You know, you don't have to, as a Jew, give up on your relationship with Torah, even if your great city that, by the way, was promised to you almost kind of like as a sign of the rightness of Judaism, you don't have to give up on that in order to sort of take this. We're at Vespasian, please, John.
He said, I'm going now, but I'll send someone to take my place. You can make a request of me, and I will grant it.
Okay, give me Yavne and its wise men. and the family chain of Rabban Gamliel, and physicians to heal Rabbi Zadok.
All right, we'll pause. We'll pause there. You know, end of the story as told by the Jews internally, as told by the rabbis internally. You know what the baddies are. You know, the Romans aren't great, but the real baddies are these Biryoni. And we've also kind of like come to a point where we still believe, you know, Afal P, even though our temple has been destroyed. So what I want to do now is look at the same issue. And I wrote this and I said, you know, told from the outside. And then I told, but that's not quite right, because this is one of the most interesting characters in the ancient period, a man called Josephus. Josephus, obviously a Greek name, born an Israelite, became an Israelite general, was the Israelite general at the siege of Gumla. And there's a very interesting story of Gumla, but he turns to the Romans and says, look, the Jewish thing is over. You know, I'll come in with you. You know, can you give me a little bit of money and I will write up this story. And I'll also tell the story of the Jews. He writes a book called The Antiquities of the Jews. In other words, how the Jews are no more. Right, and you know, Hinenu, we're still here. But what we're going to look at now is Josephus writing this from this very ambivalent sense. And when I say ambivalent, I mean ambivalent in the technical sense of being simultaneously pulled in two valences, in two different directions. Because Josephus is a Roman writing in Latin, writing from Rome, and he can't be rude, and maybe he doesn't even want to be rude to his Roman masters, but he is still a Jew and he's still interested in Judaism. This is right at the end of the story. The Romans, being now masters of the wars, they placed their ensigns upon the towers. They made joyful acclamations for the victory they had gained. When they went in numbers into the lanes of the city with their swords drawn, they slew those whom they overtook without mercy, and set fire to the houses whither the Jews were fled, and burnt every soul in them, and laid waste to a great many of the rest. It's an utter disaster. You know, you don't feel that utter disaster in that Gittin story. It feels kind of hopeful. I didn't quite finish the story. There's a slight kind of like, you know, did he do enough in asking for enough? But, you know, like you don't feel the utter destruction. It exists liturgically. I mean, we know this in the way in which we still to this day commemorate Tisha B'Av, the ninth above the destruction of the Jewish people. But look at this. I mean, and this is, you know, this is not bad, you know, as a historical record. He's writing very close to the period of time, and he knows this stuff. And although he wants to, you know, placate both his masters, although he's tugged in both directions, like there's no reason, I think, to sort of dispute this kind of stuff. And it matches what we kind of know of the archaeological record as well. And when they came to houses to plunder them, they found in them entire families of dead men, and upper rooms full of dead corpses. You know, we know that Jews committed suicide rather than yield, right? We know this from the story of Masada, again, a story which is told by Josephus, perhaps a bit more romantically than true, but definitely understood. That is of such as died by the famine. And they stood in a horror at this sight, and they went out without touching anything. That's where you feel the pull to the Romans. You know, they might be Romans, they might be murderers, but they're not desecrators of the dead. Interesting, right? But they ran through everyone who they met with and obstructed the very lanes with their dead bodies, and made the whole city run down with blood to such a degree, indeed, that the fire of many of the houses was quenched with blood. Goodness me. I mean, you know, the visceral nature of his storytelling. Josephus is one of the great historians, I think, of all time, of all peoples. And, you know, and he turned his pen to chronicle this, you know, awful moment. Yeah, let me just do this last little bit here. Just from where it says 408 on. Why is this not working? I'm trying to go smaller. There we go. This is interesting. A city, Jerusalem, that had been liable to so many miseries under the siege, that it always enjoyed as much happiness from its first foundation, right? As glorious as Jerusalem was, so it was awful during the siege. It would have been the envy of the world, nor did it on any other account so much deserve these sore misfortunes by producing such a generation of men as were the occasions of this its overflow. What's he saying? This city was overthrown. Jerusalem, this beautiful heart of the world, was destroyed because of the behavior of the idiots who were burning their own stores, who wanted to try and fight the Romans. Why didn't they, says Josephus, why didn't they find the way out? So it is interesting that although there are sort of radical, the story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai doesn't exist in Josephus's account, they both hold the sense of the sort of the tightness, the resolution, the refusal to negotiate, the refusal to kind of, make nice to the Romans, as opposed to the thing that could have saved Jerusalem, or, as Rabbi Yochanan then does, the thing that allows for a future Judaism, which is that more negotiated path. I'm not trying to say that you should always negotiate with bad things. I'm not trying to make the point, but just that we should feel that kind of interplay and that kind of texture. Did this really happen? Yes, this really happened. This is the Arch of Titus in the Forum in Rome, and again, echoes of what we had before. What did we see last week in the Hypostyle Hall in Karnak in Egypt? You have Egyptians putting up, large architecture to show their glorious campaigns, and so too in Rome. Here is this huge arch. You can absolutely see it to this day. And you can also see this sort of mural on the inside of the gold and the silver, the great 7-branched candelabra, the original menorah of the temple, being carried off to Rome from Jerusalem by these beaten Jewish slaves. And it's an extraordinary thing, again, to sort of, it's one of the classic things that Israelis tend to do. They hold up their passport on which is that image of that very menorah, taken from that very design on Titus's arch, and then they hold it there as if to say, I am still here. And Jerusalem was destroyed. These are some images of Robinson's arch. The one on the left is obviously an artist's impression of how you got up into the Second Temple before the destruction of the Second Temple. To the right is the image of the rubble of the destruction, and you can still see all these stones there. This is a fascinating museum at the south wall of the Second Temple area in the old city of Jerusalem. And in the middle, and I'm sorry the picture hasn't produced very well at all, is what's called the Masuti Kotel. You can see the stairs at the back. They lead up to these sort of platforms where you can go to this day and read Torah in an egalitarian environment. At the edge of the Kotel. What survives? What doesn't survive? What should have been given up in order to make other things survive? That tension is absolutely at the heart of who we are. I have not balanced my time as well as I could have done. I apologize. So I'm going to have to move a little quickly. This is the next thing that I want to look at, which is what happens to Judaism in its relationship with Christianity over the enormous transformation of the pagan Roman Empire into the Holy Roman Christian Empire. Starting with this idea. So this is 300 Granada. This is before the Roman Empire became Christian. This is a Christian document trying to talk about how Christians should behave to Jews. Landholders are warned not to suffer the fruits they receive from God to be blessed by the Jews, lest our benediction, who is us, the priests, lest the Christian benediction be rendered invalid and ding, 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 again, unprofitable. So what's going on? You've got people wandering the fields going, anyone want a blessing? I'll do it for dinner. I'll do it for £3. I'll do it for a starter course. I'll only do it if you give me a massive banquet. And Jews and Christians are competing to be the person that farmholders, who, by the way, clearly don't care about the theology, will just take a blessing from. If anyone shall venture to accept a blessing from a rabbi rather than a priest, let them be ejected from the church. It's interesting, right? That's not a very impressive punishment. And why is it not a very impressive punishment? Because I have no other punishment, says the Christian Council of Elvira. The only thing I can do is say to someone, you're not going to be welcome in my church, because it's only inside the church that I have power. I want you to feel that Jews and Christians pre-Constantine's conversion to Christianity are functioning in a similar level, being outsiders, wandering around trying to pick up scraps off off other people's table, but aware of a kind of like a theological interest that people have in the people of the one God, right, as it were. Again, Council of Elvira, same document, same period. Daughters of Catholics shall not be given in marriage to heretics unless they convert, right? When they convert, that's fine. And the same is also decreed of Jews. And if parents marry their daughter off to a Jew, we excommunicate the parents, but only for 5 years. Can you feel how soft that is? Can you feel how the lack of power that exists in the Christian Council of Elvira in terms of how they talk about the Jews in this time? They don't want to lose somebody forever, right? They're only going to excommunicate them for 5 years. Now, look what happens when, one second. When Jews, why can't I, sorry. When Constantine, I want to show you my little picture of Constantine. I can't, I'm struggling slightly. When Constantine converts. When Constantine converts, there we go, little picture of Constantine for you. Feel the difference in language. He's talking about women who live in weaving factories, who the Jews in their foulness take in marriage. It's decreed that these women to be restored to the weaving factories, right? A Jew marries somebody, you get them back out of that relationship. You walk straight into the matrimonial home and you pull her out. And the prohibition against intermarriage is to be preserved for the future, lest the Jew induce the Christian woman to share their shameful lives. If they do this, if the Jew inveigs a Christian woman to share their Jewish life, they are subject to a sentence of death. Oh, everything's changed. In the space of 15 years, Constantine's converted to Christianity, and look at the difference that it's made to the life of Jews. No longer are you competing for scraps off the same table, but now if you mess up, if you broach into an area of life that the Roman Catholic Empire does not want you to, death. And I can show you that again. Again, this is, Constantine. We wish to make it known to the Jews and to their elders and patriarchs that if after the enactment of this law, any of them dares to attack with stones or any other manifestation of anger, one who has fled their dangerous sect, Judaism, and attached themselves to the worship of God, Catholicism, Christianity, right? So people are being induced to leave Judaism to become Christians. And if the Jews don't like it, and they attack someone who's converted to Christianity, we must speedily be, they must be speedily given to the flames and burnt together with all their accomplices. Again, watch where the boot has gone. Watch the relationship of Judaism to Romanism and the relationship of Judaism to Christianity when Rome becomes Christian. And if any of their population should join, if any of the population of Romans, of Christians, should join with the Jews, right, go to shul, they will bear with them the deserved penalties. So all of a sudden, this is a much, much more vituperative, powerful, aggressive demonstration of the dislike of Judaism and the place of Judaism in the Roman Empire, now that the Roman Empire has become theological. I've got one more thing to do, and I think I'm not going to get through there in time today, but it's just too good to miss. So I'm just going to try and fix my. I'm going to do. Let me do this. Give me just 1 second. I'm going to stop that, and I am going to share this. The next thing that kind of is, I think, so interesting to see happen in Judaism is the rise of Islam. Again, where are we in terms of time? Muhammad, born 570, dies 632. By the time you get to 892, the Jews are no longer dealing with being subservient to the Romans, but they are dealing with being subservient to Islam and in an Islamic milieu. So what I want to sort of show is inter-Jewish rowing between Sajid and what's going on in Jerusalem. So this is a rabbi living in an Islamic world who is trying to be powerful, but he can't be powerful against the Muslims. So instead he's attacking Jerusalem. So this is an academic article written in 1942. I don't know how popular this kind of stuff still is. I suspect nobody writes like this in the academic world anymore, but this is, I thought it was really lovely and a really interesting way to get into this. I've got to move a bit more quickly. Where are we? As we come into this story, everybody thinks that Jerusalem is the most important place Jewishly. Everybody thinks that there are certain things that are only done in Jerusalem. And what's the most important thing? The calendar. If you own when Rosh Hashanah is, if you own when Pesach is, if you set those kinds of calendrical issues, you are the most important person, because you then get to say who gets to play and when they get to play. And this is what happens to this story. Ben Meir has decided the calendar, and he's writing from Jerusalem. So this is the Jerusalems are making a power play. And no one in Baghdad can handle it. The Surah academies are at a low ebb. Pumbedita's been weakened by a protracted row. There's no one in any position in Babylon who is a match for Ben Meir in Jerusalem, right? Because he's got there the ancient Palestinian traditions, and he's determined to restore the holy city as the spiritual capital of Judaism. And into this wanders this guy Sadia, born in Egypt, not even in Baghdad. He's an outsider. He's known as a man of fame, whose name, his reputation were known in every important Jewish centre, whose word carries a great weight everywhere. The news of Ben Meir's proposal struck him violently. He reacted at once with characteristic vigour, and he dispatches one letter after another, fighting against Ben Meir. And he's fighting, and he defeats his opponent overwhelmingly. And not only does he defeat his opponent overwhelmingly and resulting in himself becoming an important person, he becomes made head of the academy in Babylon. He also shifts the center of Jewish life away from Jerusalem into Baghdad. That's convenient for Jews because it's also the center of Islam. The Caliph is in Baghdad, and it's all being ruled from Baghdad. I'm sorry, I'm having to rush. But the point I want to make is that Judaism follows power. We watch very carefully where power goes. And we fight amongst ourselves. Sadiq was famous for his fight against the Karaites. And we also kind of like try and play the power base that is surrounding us. And it's always been so. And sometimes we go more stark, sometimes we go more amelioratory. But one thing that I think is kind of interesting, and I'll finish with this, Sadiq picked up a whole bunch of fights. He picked a fight with Jerusalem, he picked a fight with the Karaites, and he then picked a fight with his own exilarch inside Baghdad, one of the other leaders of Baghdad, and it resulted in really nasty language. I'm amused by that because it's always interesting to see people from 1,000 years ago be rude to one another. But I'm also aware of how we talk today in contemporary politics. And I'm also aware of the letter that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs wrote after the death of Rabbi Hugo Gryn, where he was rude to Hugo Gryn and then said, "You don't realize I'm writing in medieval Hebrew." So let's just have a look at how rude people were in medieval Hebrew, just as a way of understanding that nothing really changes when people start fighting and there's religious power at play. So Ben Meir calls Sadia a Jeroboam, which is an interesting story. Jeroboam was someone who tried to steal power from the proper king in Jerusalem and move the center of Judaism to Bethel, so outside of Jerusalem. He's a grabber of money, an increaser of bribery. And we now get reports that he's breaking Shabbos. He's bribing officials on Shabbos, walking around with money, and he's eating pig. So I don't think Sadiq ever ate pig in his life, but they're just throwing muck around. So what an interesting week to be thinking about this in the context of British politics, right? They're going to get a list of people who go around following Sadia with, Havat Tinok, with the love of children. Like they're just sort of following after him going, "Oh, isn't he lovely? Isn't he lovely?" One of these ardent suitors is said to succeed in consummating this passage, this passion with his idol. That's homosexual sexual intercourse, which is not a approved rabbinic way of behavior. Others seem to suffer nocturnal emissions, dreaming of their great leader. I mean, this is just ugly. There's no fact in any of this. They're just throwing mud, going to sleep in depravity and waking to live a life of lies and deceit. And then this one, he's deemed to call frequent public fasts so harshly that people died attempting to keep them. Where are we? It's difficult to provide leadership. It's always been difficult to provide leadership. And you will always get knocked. the stories we tell from the inside are going to be different from the stories that get told from the outside or from the edge, but you should feel them in dialogue with one another. And that's how you know that you're kind of catching something which has a kind of a historical verisimilitude. And finally, the central thing of Judaism is the negotiation of power internally to Judaism, with break-off movements around in one direction and another, and externally to Judaism. This is not new. This is absolutely who we are and absolutely how we always have been. And our ability to understand those rhythms will ground us as we face our own contemporary challenges. It will ground us as we decide if we want streaming cameras to be on, during COVID. It will ground us as we make decisions about what to say when we walk down the street and somebody says to us, "Happy Christmas." It will ground us as we make decisions about how much of the prayer service we want to keep doing because it was, quote, always done this way. Of course, it wasn't always done this way. This is what we learn from history as we unfold these matters through time. A little rushed at the back end today, but I hope fun nonetheless. I'll be back next week looking at the medieval period. We have extraordinary things to see in Egypt, in the Geniza, in medieval Spain, in the Golden Age, and we'll also look at some things, including the expulsion of the Jews from England in 1190. So lots to pick up, and thank you all hugely for your time. I'm not running anywhere if anyone's got questions, but I am going to pause the